Hi everyone and welcome to this video. In this video we're going to look at the MySQL Connector for Python, which is a standard tool that allows us to deal with MySQL database. MySQL is a popular SQL database, actually one of the most popular and open source databases out there. So in this video I'm going to look at the MySQL Connector for Python, and we look at the different ways you can use it to write our programs while communicating to a MySQL database. In this video, I'm going to be using XAMPP, which is going to give us a MySQL database. Now, if you want to download XAMPP, you're going to head over to apachefriends.org/download.html, where you'll see the different versions to install. So we have one that comes with PHP, actually comes with PHP, MySQL, and other stuff, but we're going to be using the PHP in this case. So right now I have mine downloaded, so I'm going to head over to where I downloaded it, and I'll go ahead and show you how to set it up. So I'm just going to open my downloads, so I'll head over to my downloads, and within my downloads I'll head over to my programs, and then I'll have to install this, so I'll run it as an administrator. I'll just simply right click it and say run as administrator. So this is basically going to run the installer, and then I'll say yes. And this will go ahead and install XAMPP on our system. So the beauty with XAMPP is it allows us to access a MySQL database without having to do most of the configurations. It also comes with a web UI, which we call the PHP MyAdmin, that allows us to view our databases with a graphical user interface. So we're going to look into how to set this up in a moment. So right now I see that because an access user control new system, some of them are restricted, but I'll just say okay. And after this, I'll just have to do the next thing and click next. So it's going to be installed in this folder, and I'll click next. And I'll skip the language to English, and right now we're just going to go ahead. So this is a success page. I'm just going to close it and then say next. So it's basically going to go ahead and install our XAMPP on our system. Now that our XAMPP has been installed, let's look into how we can set it up so that we begin our development. So the first thing I'm going to do is to click finish, and this is going to basically help us to start our XAMPP control panel. So I'll click finish, and when I click finish, then the XAMPP control panel is going to appear. That's going to basically help us to start the different servers. So we're going to look into that in a second. So right here I have the XAMPP control panel, and we can actually open it up. So let me actually see. So right here on our XAMPP panel, what we're going to do is to start our MySQL server. So what I'm going to do is to click on the start button right here. We even have other things such as our Apache server, our MySQL server. We have other things such as FileZilla, Mercury, and Tomcat. What we're going to be using is Apache and MySQL. So I'm going to start the Apache server right here. And when I start the Apache server, I'm also going to start the MySQL server. Now after doing this, then we are going to get a prompt. So we need to actually allow the MySQL D. So what I'll do is actually click on allow access. And after doing that, then our MySQL server has been started. We also have our Apache running. So what I'll do is to go in our web browser. Here I'm using Chrome, and what I'll do is to say local host. So I'm just going to go to localhost. I'm not going to navigate to any port of some sort. So that will actually redirect us to our dashboard, and this dashboard is going to give us access to our PHP MyAdmin. So when I go to our PHP MyAdmin right here, we have a web application that basically helps us to manipulate our MySQL databases. So this is very helpful, as it may help us to view our database tables, to view our databases via our web UI, just like you see right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create a user, and I'm going to grant this user all privileges for our database. So what I'm going to do is to go to our user account section, and within this tab I'm going to come right here, and what I'll do is to create a new user account. So I'm going to give this user a username. So I'll give the username a name of, let's say, my name, and then I'll select the host name. So in this case I'm going to select our local host, and then I'm going to provide a password. So I'll just keep this to password, and I'm going to retype this password again. So I'll leave it to password, and After that, so I want to generate a password for this. I'll just keep it to our password. And after creating that password, I'll just come and create a database with the same name, and I grant all privileges. I also grant all privileges in that wildcard name. So I'll also grant all the global privileges to this user. So this user is going to be able to create databases and do other administration tasks. So I'll just check them all. And after doing that, then I'll just click on go, and our user is going to be created. So I'm not going to save this password for now. So right now we have our user created. Now the next thing we're going to do is to use this user to connect to our MySQL database. Now we're going to use the MySQL connector for Python with the credentials we've created with our MySQL database. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create our virtual environment and then go ahead and install our MySQL connector for Python. So I'm going to do this in our VS Code. So I'm going to go to our Visual Studio Code right here. And what I'll do is to open up my terminal. So I'm going to use git bash in this video, but feel free to use anything. So I'll open up my git bash. I'm going to close this PowerShell for now. And right here in my terminal, what I'm going to do is to create a virtual environment. So the way I create a virtual environment is with Python -m, and then I'll call env and then vim. So what I'm basically doing is to call our vim command. Actually our vim module as a command, and this is basically going to go ahead and create our virtual environment within this folder. So right now, actually our module is called vim, so I'll call our virtual environment env, and this will create our virtual environment. So after creating our virtual environment, the next thing is going to actually be activating it as well as installing our MySQL connector for Python. So we're going to go ahead and do that while after our virtual environment has actually been created. So now our virtual environment has been created. I'm going to go ahead and activate it with source env. So now we are on Windows, so we need to call scripts, and then I'm going to call the activate script. So this is actually going to activate our virtual environment. So after creating our virtual environment and activating it, now I'm going to go ahead and install our Python connector for MySQL. So I'm just going to do that with pip install, and then I'll say MySQL connector, and then I'll say Python. So this will go ahead and install the MySQL connector for Python within our virtual environment. So right now that our MySQL connector for Python has been installed, I'm just going to go ahead and confirm whether it has been installed in our virtual environment. So the way I'll do that is by saying pip, and then I'll say list. So this will list all the dependencies we've installed. So we have the MySQL connector for Python right here. So we are set. Now the next thing we're going to do is to connect to MySQL using the user we have created. So I'm just going to do this by saying, so I'm just going to come and create a new file. And what I'll do is to call this connect.py. So connect.py is going to help us to connect to our SQL database, or MySQL in this case. So the first thing I'm going to do is to import our MySQL connector. So that I'll do that by saying import our MySQL.connector. And after doing this, now we're going to create an object that's going to help us to connect to our database. So the way we're going to do that is by creating our object. So I'll call it db, and this is going to actually be MySQL.connector, and then I'll call the connect function. So I'm just going to call the connect function. Right after calling this connect function, it takes in arguments. So these arguments are basically the credentials that we use to authenticate or to connect to MySQL. So we've created a user with our names, our username, and we also specified a host. So the way I'm going to do that is create a simple dictionary right here. So I'm just going to come and say, actually let me just call this connection. Actually, I just call them connection verse, and this is going to be a dictionary. So it's going to have our user as our first credential, and this user is going to be our user that we created. We're also going to have the password of that user. So I'm just going to come and say password, and that password is going to be our password. And right after doing this, then the next thing I'm going to do is to also specify our host. So I'm just going to come and specify our host, and this host is going to be our local host as we created it in our php.myadmin. So right after doing this, then we're going to use this dictionary to create a connection object. So the way I'm going to do that is by coming, and since this is a dictionary, the way we are going to basically split all these values and their keys is by using this syntax. I'm just going to come and provide star star and then connection. So I'm just going to call this connection vars. And right after doing this, then I'll just simply print this for now. So I'm just going to come and say dp, and when I close this or when I save this, I'm just going to pull up my terminal, and what I'll do is to run a Python connect.py. So this is going to show us a connection object. So we have a connection object which is for MySQL.connector.connection, and this is an object stored at this location in memory. Now the next thing we can also find out is every connection we create with MySQL has a connection ID. So what I'm going to do is to close this for now. And what I'll do is to print the connection ID. So the way we do that is by printing db.connection ID. And when I save this, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my terminal. So when I run connect.py, right now we have the connection ID as 35. So this means that we can create different connections with our MySQL credentials. So what I'll do is to basically create others. So I'll call this dp1. So I'll call this dp1, and it's going to connect with this. So I'll just create others. So I'll just come right here and create a db2. So I'll just come and say this is going to be a db2, as well as print the db2 connection ID. So I'll come and create another connection. For example, I'll paste this here and I'll call this db3. Now also going to have a db3.connection ID. Sorry for this. So right here, I'm going to have a db3.connection ID. So I'm just going to close this for now. And what we're going to do is to basically run and observe something. So when I open my terminal once again, I'm just going to come and print run a code. So I'll just say Python connect.py. And right now I have db. So let me actually see. We instead of db1, we actually say db. So I'll just come right here, and when I run this file, we now see the various connection IDs of our connections. So for example, if I run this file again, what happens is we have assigned the connection IDs to these connection objects. So every time we connect to MySQL, we create a new connection, and that connection has a connection ID. Best practice states that we have to basically close each connection we create after using it. So what we're going to do is to come and create and close our connections. So the way we close our connections is by basically saying db1.close. So I'll just basically call the close method onto this object, and that will close that connection. So what I'll do is to also come right here and then say db2, in this case we say close, and then I'll come and say db3.close, and this will go ahead and basically close the connection that we shall have at that given time. So when I save this and run our file again, Python, and this is going to be our connect.py, we now see that we are printing unique connection IDs, but now our connections have been closed. So we're going to keep one connection, and that's what we're going to use for this video. So what I'll do is to basically come right here, and the first thing I'm going to do is to remove these extra connections that you created. And right after removing these connections, I'm going to just simply keep one connection. So I'm not going to close this connection, and this is what we're going to be using for the rest of that video. So after doing this, then we are going to use this to create our database. Now that we've created our data, we have been able to actually connect to our MySQL database. The next thing we're going to do is to basically create our database. So keep in mind that we've looked at only one way of connecting to our database, which is connecting with our credentials via the connector.connect method. So what I'm going to do is to use this db instance or our connection object to create our database. So I'm just going to come right here, and what I'll do is to create a new file. So I'm just going to call this create a database. So I'm just going to call this create a database.py. And when we are here, the first thing we're going to do is to create a cursor object from our DB connection object. So I'll just import our connection object. So I'll say from connect, which is actually our connect.py. So I'm just going to call from connect. I'm going to import our DB1 connection object. And after calling this object, I'm just going to go ahead and create our cursor object. So the cursor object is important as it's going to allow us to create, read, delete databases, and so on. So what I'm going to do is to create our cursor object. So I'll just say cursor, and this cursor is going to be db1. Actually, sorry for this. It's going to be db1 dot cursor. Now, every time we want to execute an SQL statement, we use our cursor object, and the way we do that is by coming and saying. So we're going to say cursor dot execute. So this is actually going to execute our SQL statement. Now we're going to also write our SQL statement. So I can just come right here and write a statement. So this is going to be our statement, and this statement is going to be our SQL statement we want to execute at this given point. So what I'll do is to come and say that we're going to have our SQL statement. So we're going to just basically create our database. So what I'm going to do that is saying create. So this is actually SQL. So I'll just say create database. And when I say this, we're going to create a new database, and we're just going to call this database books. So after doing this, then I'll just come right in here, and what I'll do is to basically execute this statement. So I'll just come and say cursor.execute and then our statement. So when I save this, I'm going to go ahead and run this file, and it's going to create our database. So I'm going to pull out my terminal right here, and what I'll do is to basically run Python and then create a database.py. So this is going to run, and now we have our connection ID printed out. So let's go to our web UI and check out our database. So when I go to our phpMyAdmin right here and go to databases, we now see that our database books has been created. But right now we don't have any tables in this database, and we're going to look at how to create these tables. Now that our database has been created, let's go ahead and look at how we can create a table within this database. So the first thing I'm going to do is to head over to our Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to create a simple file which I'm going to call create. So I'm just going to call this table.py. So we're going to need a cursor object as well as our DB or our connection object in this case. So what I'll do is to first import our connection object. So I'll say from connect. We are going to go ahead and import our DB1, which is our MySQL connection object. And then I'm going to create a cursor out of this object. So I'm going to just say cursor, such as this is going to be cursor, and I'm going to say this is going to be db1.cursor. So after creating our cursor, then what I'm going to do is to select the database you want to use. With MySQL, you have to select the database you want to use in case you want to basically create a table with that database. So the first thing I'm going to do is to execute our statement of basically selecting the database you want to use. So we're going to do that by using cursor. So I'm just going to say cursor.execute, and then right in here, I'm just going to basically write the SQL statement that we're going to write. So in this case, it's going to be use our database, which is books. So I'll just say books. And right after doing that, then we shall access that we shall actually access our database and then be able to create our table on that database. So to do this, I'll just come and say cursor dot execute, and then right in here, I'll just come and write our statement. So I'm just going to write our SQL statement here, and this SQL statement is going to basically have these following statements. So we're going to create a table. So I'll say it's going to be for creating a table. Actually, this is going to be multi-line string. So I'll just write these triple quotes, and we're going to create a table. So I'm just going to say create a table, and then we shall create our table and call it book. And then this table is going to have the following fields. So the first thing we're going to have is our primary key, or our ID in this case. So I'm just going to come and say we're going to have an ID which is going to be our int, and this is actually going to be auto incrementing. So shall just say auto increment. And right after doing this, then we shall also give the title of our book. So actually, I have a habit of modeling everything I want to do. So let's say we're going to have a book. I'll just basically write this here. So we're going to have our book and this book is going to have it's going to have basic fields. So for example, shall have a title, and this title is going to be a string. So we're going to have a string of, let's say, the title can be as long as 40 characters long. And let's say we have the author, so the author is also going to be a string, and this string, let's say, is going to have 45 characters long. Now we can also have the ISBN, and let's say it's going to be text, and then we can also have the actually, let's just keep it simple, so I'll just keep it to this, or let's say we even add a description, so we'll just add a description here, and this description is actually going to be also text. Now we can also have our ID, which will be our primary key, so I'm just going to say that our ID is going to be our integer, and it will be our primary key. So right here, I'm just going to come and basically populate this. I'm just going to come and say we're going to have a title. So this title is going to be a varchar or a string, and this string is going to be of 40 characters. Now we're also going to create our author, so I'll just come and say that our author is going to be a varchar, and then this varchar is going to be of 45 characters. So I'll just come and say 45 characters. We're going to have an ISBN, the ISBN of the book, so I'll just come and write that as well. And then this is going to be text, so we are set for that. And I'll also come right in here and create our description. So I'm just going to add our description, and this description will also be text. Now the beauty with MySQL is that SQL statements can also be written in lowercase. For example, if you wrote this in lowercase, you wouldn't get any errors as long as our syntax is correct. So having this, then we're going to go ahead and execute this statement using our cursor right here. So I'll just come right here, and actually I forgot to specify our primary key, so I'll do that by just saying primary key. So I'll just come and say primary key, and then our primary key is actually going to be our ID. So right after doing that, I'll just come here and say statement. So we're going to execute the statement. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. So when I save this and we run this file, we expect that our table is going to be created. So I'm just going to pull out my terminal right here, and what I'll do is to say Python, and then we're going to say create table. So we're going to run create table with py, and this is going to go ahead and create our table. So when you head over to our web UI in our Chrome, so I'm just going to head over to our web UI, and I refresh. We'll now see that our database has one table, which is our book table in this case. So when you explore our book table, we are going to see the different fields we've created on this table. For example, our ID, our title, our author, our ISBN, and our description. Now that we've created our table, we're going to look at how we can populate our table with summary. For now, we've been able to create our database tables. Now let's go ahead and insert some records into our database table. So I'm going to head over to our Visual Studio Code right here, and within here, I'm just going to close my terminal for now, and I'll create a new file which I'm going to call insert.py. So insert.py is where I'm going to write the code that's going to be necessary while inserting into our database. So to do that, I'll just come and say from. So I'm going to import our connection objects. I'll say from connect. We are going to import our DB1. And after importing our DB1, then we're going to go ahead and basically use this DB1 to create our cursor. So I'll do that with cursor. So I'll just say cursor is going to be equal to DB1 dot cursor. So I'll just keep on creating the cursor with our connection object. So after creating our cursor, then the next thing is going to be to actually use this cursor to select the database we want to use. So I'll just say cursor, it's actually going to be cursor dot execute, and then since we want to select a database we want to use, so I'm just going to say use. Our database is actually going to be books, so let me actually write this in uppercase. So I'll just come right here and say use book, and this is actually books. And right after doing this, then what I'm going to do is to go ahead and write our statement. So to insert into our MySQL database, we're going to use an insert statement. So I'm just going to come right here and write our insert statement. So this statement is going to be a statement like we're going to insert into our table, then we specify the different values we want to insert into our table. So to do that, I'm going to come and say insert into our book table. So we're going to say book, And then we are going to specify what we want to insert into this table. So I'm just going to come here and mention the various fields. So we're going to have our title, and we're going to have our, so I'm just going to come here and examine the different fields. We have title, author, ISBN, and description. So we're going to have title, we're going to have an author, we're going to have an ISBN, we're also going to have our description. So right after having this, then we're going to specify the different values that we're going to add into this table. So I'm just going to come here and say values, and then right here I'll just come and say we're going to have this syntax that's going to allow us to basically put variables in here. So I'm just going to come, so this is actually going to be for our title, this will be for our author. I'm also going to do the same thing here. We shall have our ISBN, and then we shall have our description. So right after having this, then we're going to use our statement to insert into our table. So what we need is a tuple of values that we are going to use to substitute into these variables. So I'll just come right here and then create that tuple. So I'll just come and say, actually call this values. And this values is going to be a tuple for a single record. And here we're going to have our title. So let's say we're going to have our title as Django for beginners. So I'm just going to say Django for beginners. And right after here, I'm just going to come and also provide the author. So the author of that book was W.S. Vincent. And then we are going to also add the ISBN. So I'll just write a random string for now. And I'll provide the descriptions. For example, this is a book that introduces, let's say, the Django. So I'll just say this is a book that introduces Django. Now that we have our values, we can go ahead and substitute these values for our values in our statement. So to do that, I'm just going to use our cursor object. So I'll just come and say cursor dot execute. So I'll just come right here and say cursor dot execute. Now we are going to have our statement as well as our values. So the way we're going to do that is by saying statement, comma, and then we have values. So what is going to happen is our statement will get executed, but then we shall need values to substitute in for these placeholders. So we're going to actually come right here and basically add in our tuple of values, and for when we have a title, we shall have the title, our description, our ISBN, as well as our description. So right after doing this, then what we're going to do is to finally commit to our database. So the way we do that is by using our MySQL connection object. So we shall do that by saying db1.commit. And right after doing this, this is basically enough to add this record into our database. So I'm just going to pull up my terminal, and when I pull up the terminal, I'm just going to run Python insert.py. So this is actually going to go ahead and insert our record into our database. Now let's head over to our web UI to confirm this. So I'm just going to come right here in our Chrome, and when I go to our web UI, I'm going to refresh once again. And right now we have our record added with an ID of 1. We have the title as Django for beginners. We have our author, our ISBN, as well as our description. Now this is working. So we're going to look at how we can also insert many records into our MySQL database. So to do that, I'm going to head over to our insert menu. So I'm actually going to go to our Visual Studio Code right here. And when I go to our Visual Studio Code, I'm going to close this for now. So I'm going to close the terminal, and then I'm going to create a file. So this file is going to be insert many.py. So it's actually going to insert many records for now. So I'll basically copy most of the code that we have here, and it's actually the same code, but we're going to change only a few things. So I'll just come right in here and paste our code. So we have our cursor object, and then we're going to select the database we're going to use, which is our books database. Then we have our statement right here, but what we need in this case is to have a list of all the books that we want to insert in this case. So what I'm going to do is to change our values tuple into a list of tuples. So I'm just going to create a list of tuples right here. And after creating this list of tuples, now I'm going to add many tuples that are going to have our books. So I'm just going to come right here. I'll copy this tuple right here. And now, since we have our tuple, I'm just going to go ahead and basically create more tuples that are going to actually be of different kinds. So I'm just going to add this. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. So let me actually tidy this up so that you can see it clearly. So what you have here is we have different tuples contained in our books. So I'm just going to change this to Django for. I'm actually going to change this to Django for APIs. I'm actually going to turn this into Django for professionals. And then I'm also going to change this to, let's say, this is actually going to be Django by, so this is actually going to be Django by example. Some of the best books I've read about Django. So I'm going to save this. And when I save this now, we have a list of tuples. So what are we going to do to basically insert all these records into our database? So to do this, I'm going to actually change our statement right here. So what I'm going to do is to change this execute to execute many. And this will basically go ahead and insert all these into our database. Forgive my indentations and my code, it's not that tidy, but let's move on. So when I execute this, so I'm going to come and pull up my terminal. So I'm just going to come and say Python, and then right here I'm going to just say insert many.py. And right now this is going to actually go ahead and insert all these records into our database. So when I go right to our web UI right here, I refresh. I'm actually going to refresh. So when I refresh right here, we now see that we populated our database with all these records. So we've been able to actually add more records in our database using the same SQL command. But what we've done is to actually change our execute statement into one that's going to allow us to create many objects or create many records. And that is by using the execute many method on our cursor object right here. So let's go ahead and look at how we can be able to basically add and order and update and delete other things. So let's go ahead and look at that. So for now, we're going to look into how we're going to fetch our records from our table. So what I'm going to do is to create a file right here, and this file is going to be fetch.py. So within our fetch.py, I'm going to go ahead and basically fetch all our records from our database. So to do that, I'll first import our DB instance or our DB connection object. So I'll just say from connect, we are going to import our DB1. And after importing our DB1, then I'm going to use it to create our cursor, which we have done already. So I'll just say cursor is equal to DB1 dot cursor. So it's actually going to be our cursor. So after creating our cursor object, we're going to go ahead and use this to select our database. So we shall do that by saying cursor, and then we shall say cursor.execute. So actually we're going to execute this following SQL statement that's basically just going to select the database we're going to use. So our database is books. And right after selecting our database, then what I'm going to do is to basically write our statement. So now we're going to just select our books. So I'll just come and say our statement is going to be our SQL statement. So in this statement is actually just going to be select star from our books. So actually I'm just going to say select star from book. So what this is going to do is going to select all fields of all records that we have in our table and then return our result. So for us to be able to execute this statement and see our result, what we're going to say is cursor, and in this case we're going to say cursor dot execute. Actually, I'm just going to say cursor dot execute, and then we shall pass in our statement for now. So I'll say we're going to write our statement right here. And after using this, then what we need is to basically return our result. So I'm just going to call a variable called result. I'm actually just going to say that our result is going to be equal to our, so we need to specify a way that we're going to return these. So what we need is to actually return all the records that we've selected then. So to do this, I'm just going to come and say cursor dot fetch all, and then this is going to be our result. So we need to just print or to print every result that we have, since this is actually going to return a list of our records. So to do that, I'll just use a simple for loop. So I'll just say for r in results. So I'm just going to say for r in results, and then I'm just simply going to go ahead and print r. So I'm just going to save. So I'm just going to run this and let's see what happens. So when I come right here, I'm just going to run Python and then fetch.py. So right here we have actually made a mistake. I've made a mistake in my spelling. So it's actually execute. So when I save this, I'm just going to come and run. So right now we see that it's returning all records that we have in our database. So this is actually working. So now let's look at how we can return one object or one record in case we've executed the query. So we're going to repeat the same SQL statement, but we want to return only one row that represents that specific query. So I'm going to close this for now, and what I'll do is to basically copy this. So I'm just going to come and copy all this. And once I copy this, then what I'm going to do is to come right in here. So I'll create a new file and then I'll call this fetch. Actually, I'm just going to call this fetch1. So I'll just say new file and then I'll say fetch. So I'm just going to say fetch1.py. And within fetch1.py, I'm just going to come right here, and what I'll do is to paste in our code. So I'm just going to have the same SQL statement, but right now I want to basically just fetch one row that represents the query we have right here. So to do that, I'm just going to change this to cursor.fetch1. And now since this is not an iterable, I'll just say while result is not none. So because this actually returns none if that result does not exist. So I'm just going to go ahead and print our result. So once we have this, then I'm going to just go ahead and run this. So when I come right here, I'm just going to come and say Python, and then I'm going to run fetch1.py. It's actually going to basically print that object. So I'm just going to stop this since it's an infinite while loop. So I'm just going to come and print my result here, print my result. So I'm just going to come right here, and when I run this, you now see that we are returning one row containing that specific result. Now, what we're going to do is to actually query for all our objects as well as to order them in ascending and descending order. So sometimes you may want to basically query, but then basically order everything you're querying in an ascending or descending order. And the beauty is MySQL statements can be done that can be able to return such results. So let's do that by creating a new file right here. So I'm just going to call this order. I'm just going to call this ordering. I'm just going to call it ordering records.py. And once we have this, I'm going to close my terminal right here. And the first thing I'm going to do is to, actually, I'm just going to come right here and fetch all. I'm just going to come to our fetch.py. I'll copy the code we have right here, and then I'll come within our order records.py. I'll paste in our code. So basically what's happening is we have our SQL statement that selects all books. So what you're going to do is to order these books by a certain field. So let's say we're going to order these books by the ID. So I'll just come right here and say we are going to order by, so we're going to order by, actually this is going to be order by, then we're going to specify by the ID, and then we're going to specify that we'll need this in an ascending order. So to do that, we shall just say ascending order. So if I save this, and right here we have our statement being executed, we have our results that's basically returning all results. So we're going to print all our results containing all these records in an ascending order. So if I come and run this, so I'm just going to come and say Python, and then what I'll run is I'm actually going to run a Python ordering.py, and this is going to return our books, but in this case we're going to return them in an ascending order from 1 up to 6. Actually, we have 5 records. We have 1 up to 5, which is the biggest ID in this case. Now let's say we wanted to return these books in a descending order. What we do is to actually come, so I'll just write close my terminal right there, and instead of ascending, I'm just going to come and basically return descending. So when I save this and open up my terminal once again, I'm going to run our file the next time. And right now we see that we are starting with the last record in our table, which is of ID 5, and then we are ending with our record, which is of ID 1, which is actually our first record. So this is basically how we can order our records when we query for them. Sometimes you may want to actually return your results, but then you may want to limit them to a certain number of results. Now the beauty is with MySQL you can write limit statements. So what you're going to do is to create a new file right here. I'm going to create a simple file here. I'm going to call it limit.py. So what you're going to do is to first query for all our objects. So I'll do that by importing our connections object. So I'll just do that by saying from connect, we're going to import our DB1 connection object. We're going to create a cursor from this. So I'm just going to come and say it's actually going to be our cursor object. So I'm just going to come and say cursor is going to be equal to our DB1 dot cursor. And once you have our cursor, then we shall use it to select our database. So we're just going to come and say cursor dot execute. So this is actually going to be for executing our statement. That's going to select our books database. So I'll just say use books, and then right here we're going to actually execute our statement for selecting all our books. So I'm going to write our statement right here. So this is actually going to be an SQL statement. And what this statement is going to be is for this case we want to select all books from our database, but let's say we want to limit them to only 2 records and starting from a certain ID. So the way we do that is by writing our select statement, just like we've been writing them. So I'll just say select star from, in this case our table is books. Actually our table is book. Now I want to limit to a certain number of books. So let's say we're going to limit to 3 books. And what you want to do is to also select where I want to start from, the ID you want to start from. So let's say offset. So we're going to say offset, and this is going to be 1. So what this statement actually means is we are going to limit our query to only 3 records, but we're going to start from ID 1 moving forward. So for example, we're going to select books starting from ID of 2, and then we're going to select only 3 books in that query. So let's go ahead and execute this. So we're going to use our cursor. So I'll say cursor dot execute, and then right in here I'm just going to pass in our statement. And when I pass in our statement, I'm just going to go ahead and use our cursor to basically return all our rows. So what I'll do is to say for r in our cursor dot fetch all, since we want to return all our records. So this is actually going to return an iterable. So we're just going to go ahead and print r. So actually for now, let's say we want to actually just return actually let's return all the fields. So what I'm going to do is just print this. So when I run this, I'm just going to pull up my terminal and I'll run Python and then limit.py. So right here we're going to have an error. So actually we don't have an error, we just didn't save, so we're not getting any results. So I'm just going to run this again. And right now we see that it's limiting to 3 results, but it's starting from ID of 2, because then we specified our offset to be at ID 1. So now that we have done this, we're going to go ahead and look at how we can update our records. So the first thing we're going to do is to basically create a new file. So I'm going to create a new file right here, and I'm going to call this file update.py. And this update.py is basically going to help us to update our record in our table. So the first thing I'm going to do is to import our DB1 connection object. So to do that, I'll just come and say from our connect module, I'm going to import our DB1, and then I'm going to create a cursor using this. So I'm just going to create our cursor object, and this is going to be DB1 dot our cursor. So right after creating our cursor, then the next thing is going to be to basically use this cursor to select the database we want to use. So I'll just come and say cursor dot execute, and then actually this is supposed to be execute, and then right here I'll select the database we want to use, which is going to be our database of books. And right after we have our database of books, I'm going to go ahead and basically execute our statement. So in this case, we want to update a certain record. So let's go back to our web UI. So right here in our web UI, we have a different objects or different records in our database. So if you look at these records, we are going to be able to select a record by some attribute or by some field and then be able to update it accordingly. So what I'm going to do is to go back to our Visual Studio Code. So I'm just going to come right here in our Visual Studio Code. So right in here, what I'm going to do is to basically write a statement. So let's say I'm going to write a statement, and let's say I want to update the book with some ID. So I'm just going to write a statement such as, so I'm just going to come and say update, and so I'm just going to say update, and in this case I'll specify the table I want to update. So I'll just come and say update book, and then I'll say set, and then I'll set maybe the title of that book. So I'll say set title, and then I'll specify the new title. So let's say uh, let me actually just say this book is going to be eloquent JavaScript. So I'm just going to say eloquent JavaScript. And then right in here, I'm going to specify which book we want to update based on its ID. So to do this, I'll just say where the ID is equal to, let's say, 1. And now I'll use our cursor to basically execute this statement. So I'll just come right here and say that we want our cursor to execute this. So I'll say cursor.execute, and then I'll say that we're going to specify our statement. And right after giving in our statement, then what I'm going to do is to basically go ahead and run this file. So actually what I'll do is to use our DB connection to update this. So I'll just come and say db1.commit. So when I save this, I'm going to go ahead and run our file. So I'll do this with Python 3, and then I'll basically say update.py. And right now, actually this is going to be our Python. So I'll just run this with Python update.py, and right now this is going to go ahead and update our record in our database. So when you go back to our web UI right here, we can be able to actually see that our title for book of ID of 1 has been changed to eloquent JavaScript. Now let's look at how we can go ahead and delete our records. So to delete our records, what I'm going to go and do is to create a new file in our VS Code. So I'm going to head over to our Visual Studio Code right here. I'm going to create a file which I'm going to call delete dot. So I'm just going to leave delete.py, and within delete.py, I'm going to just come right here and I'll do the same thing. So I'm just going to create our cursor from our connection. So I'll just say from connect, we are going to import our connection object, and then from that connection object we shall create a cursor. So I'm just going to come and say cursor, and this cursor is going to be equal to our connection object dot the cursor. So I'm just going to create a cursor from that object, and then from this object I'm just going to simply come, and what I'll do is to write a statement. So actually first select the database we're going to use. So I'll do that by saying cursor dot execute, and then right in here we're going to execute the various SQL. So here it's going to actually just be to select our book database. So I'm just going to come and say we're going to select our books database, and after selecting our books database, now the next thing is going to be to delete a book from this specific database. So what I'm going to do is to write a statement. So I'll just write a statement. I'm just going to write a statement, and this is going to be an SQL statement. So right in here I'll just say delete from. So I'll have to specify the table. So in this case it's going to be from book, and then I specify which field I want to base on to delete that exact row. So to do that I'll just say where. So let's say where ID is equal to, let's say, 5. Now I'm just going to come and use our cursor to delete this. So I'm just going to come and say cursor.execute, and then I'm going to execute our statement. So I'm just going to say cursor.execute statement, and then I'll use our db instance or our connection object to commit this. So I'll say db1.commit. So when I save this and run this, I'm going to just come right here, and then I run Python, and this is going to be delete.py, We now see that our record has been deleted. So if we go to our web UI to now Chrome and I refresh, so I'm going to come right here and refresh. We now see that we have only 4 records, yet we had 5. So that means our database record has been deleted successfully. Now we're going to look into how we can be able to drop our entire table using MySQL. So to do that, I'm just going to come within our VS Code, and what I'm going to do is to create a new file, which is going to be a simple file. So I'm just going to come and say drop table.py, and what I'll do is to close my terminal for now. So I'm just going to import our object. Actually, I'll just copy the SQL we just wrote in the previous example. I'm just going to come right here and copy it. So when I copy this, I'm just going to basically paste it right here. And what I'll do is to drop our table. Now that we have our database, and actually we don't need to specify actually what I'm going to do is to drop our table. So to drop our table, we're going to select our database, and then what I'll do is to just change our delete statement. So this will actually be drop. So we shall just say drop table, and then we specify the table name. So that table name is going to be book, and then we shall just come and execute our statement. So when we execute our statement, then this is going to be the entire table of our books is going to be dropped or deleted. So I'm just going to come right here and run. So I'll run Python and then drop.py. So this is actually going to go ahead and delete our entire table for our books. So when we go back to our web UI right here and we refresh, so right now we have no table named book. So if you go to our database books, we now see that you don't have any current created table. In this video, we've been able to look at MySQL Connector for Python and the different ways you can use it to deal with MySQL databases using the Python programming language. Thank you for watching, guys, and if you've enjoyed this video and you found it useful, please consider liking, help this video get to as many people as possible. Consider subscribing if you're new, and don't forget to check out my other videos on such topics. Thank you for watching, guys, and see you in the next video. Bye.